All right, so let's start with the big story that we're tracking on WY1 at this hour, where the state of Missouri in the United States is suing China over the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the lawsuit has been filed in a federal court, and it seeks damages from China for having covered up the pandemic. Now, Missouri is led by Donald Trump's Republican Party. The Attorney General's lawsuit is in line with the president's criticism of China. It accuses China of lying about the virus and also having silenced the whistleblowers. It has also accused the leadership in China of negligence, resulting in enormous death and suffering all over the world. Now, this, in fact, is the first legal effort anywhere in the world that seeks accountability from China. Meanwhile, in China, a human trial is presently underway for a possible vaccine. We're being told that tens of volunteers are part of this trial and that the results so far are positive. Now, the vaccine targets the initial strain of the virus and a few early mutations, and herein, of course, lies the big challenge. Now, ever since the outbreak started in Wuhan, the novel coronavirus has mutated, according to reports, into as many as about 4,300 variations. In Wuhan, the administration is also distributing coupons to residents, and these coupons can be exchanged at restaurants and transport hubs and are aimed at encouraging spending and also at kick-starting the economy. While much of China is now returning to normal, one city in China's northeast has, of course, tightened travel curbs after a surge in COVID-19 cases. Now, Harbin is the capital of the Heilongjiang province that borders Russia, and it is now dealing with an influx of cases from its northern neighbors. Non-locals are banned from entering residential zones. There are similar rules for vehicles from other parts of China as well. All right, now to give us more insights in terms of how China, of course, is responding to this talk of cases being filed against China to hold China accountable for the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are joined in by Patrick Falk, who's joining us live from Beijing. Now, good afternoon to you, Patrick, and let me, of course, begin by asking you in terms of what has happened in the state of Missouri in the United States, where the state of Missouri has now decided to sue China for negligence and for resulting the COVID-19 pandemic in developing into a global pandemic. How are the Chinese responding to this?
Well, there's certainly no official response coming from the Chinese, and it does seem unlikely that there will be. This isn't the first lawsuit of its kind that's been made against the Chinese government, but it is, as far as we understand, the first by a U.S. state, essentially accusing China of covering up the coronavirus outbreak or the extent of the outbreak, particularly in the beginning months, and also not making it clear about the ability of the virus to transmit from humans to humans in the early months of the outbreak. As I say, though, not likely to get any response as such from the Chinese. As one commentator has already put it, if we can start going after governments about these sorts of things and the economic trouble that they have caused, then a lot of people are going to be putting their hands up and pointing the finger at the US over the 2008 global financial crisis. However, this is indicative of the environment that we're in, and there is a sort of growing backlash from Western governments in particular against China over what has happened. And in particular, there has been a development from Australia with the Prime Minister there saying that he had been in overnight calls with President Trump, as well as the leaders of France and Germany, calling for a probe into the origins of the virus. That still isn't something that is clear at this point, and China has hit back and accused Australia of parroting these claims that are being made by the US. We also had China's ambassador to the US hit out at President Trump for making the allegation that China had intentionally perhaps pushed this virus on the rest of the world. So it does seem as though the atmosphere between global leaders against China is stiffening.
Right.
But as far as we understand, with the lawsuit that's being made against China, no response as of yet.
Absolutely. And also, there is this talk of, reparations that China may have to pay. This is something that is doing the rounds. There was a paper in Germany that spoke of reparations to the tune of almost about $160 billion. There are also talks that perhaps because China has lent out so much money to African nations, different African nations, and because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the economic activity has come virtually to a standstill, and therefore China must not try and ask these African nations to repay some of these loans. How is China looking at all of this talk?
Concessions, if you like. There's no precedence for it as far as we understand, and China in many ways feels that it's trying to do what it can to support countries that are grappling with the crisis at this time.
And also one quick question just before I let you go, Patrick. There are reports of certain cases of infections where people had first completely recovered and then they again tested positive for COVID-19. How much of a concern is this within China? I think there seems to be a problem with the line there with my colleague Patrick Fox. So this, of course, is the big story where the state of Missouri has now gone ahead and sued China for negligence and also for bringing about and causing the COVID-19 pandemic. How all of this, of course, pans out is something that will be seen in the coming days.